Spike Jones Cocktails for Two. And I've got two perfect smogberry cocktails lined up right in front of me here in the neighborhood. Dave Lefkowitz here on the radio show Dave's Gone By. One of those smogberry cocktails is for me, just to keep my my throat liquidated. That's totally the wrong word, but I don't care because I'm in a crazy, demented mood. Because the other person joining me in the neighborhood this Saturday morning is one of the great legendary broadcasters of all time. And I can't believe he's with us. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Demento. Hey, Doctor.
Oh, let me try that cocktail here. Whoa, you mix a good one.
Well, thank you so much, Doctor. I've been using a blender. It's really, I put ice and rocks and really whatever else shoelaces. But it's a potent brew, I think. So I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yes, indeed.
So, Dr. D, are you, let me ask, one of the things I was doing in my research on you was noticing that there's a video of you talking about when, I guess it's about 20 years ago now, a room in your house in California the floor started to sag or something because of the weight.
Yes.
Are you still in that house?
No, I'm in a different house now.
Oh, okay.
And the room where all the records are has a concrete slab floor, so if we have an earthquake, it still could fall down, but they're not going to fall through the floor.
Well, they'll fall upward. It's kind of a anti-gravitational pull. And so let me ask you, at that time, how many, and back then I guess it was really only records and maybe, well, CDs were there already, but how many did you have?
1989, there were a few CDs and lots and lots and lots of tapes. Everybody sending me a new song at that time. It was usually on a cassette tape or sometimes a reel-to-reel tape. But, I stopped counting at 250,000 records. But, it's not the quantity that counts. It's the quality.
Oh, well, you stopped counting at 250,000. That's amazing. I would figure someone like you would be almost like a Steve Allen who had this whole treasure trove of his work, but it was cataloged, literally. I mean, he knew exactly how much he had and where every single thing was. I imagine you know where every single thing is.
Oh, kind of. I catalog only as much as needed. Most of what I've done with cataloging, since CDs came in, since I've been able to record CDs, everything that you hear on the radio show has been transferred to CD. So as I've made those CDs, I've kept a computer catalog of those so that I can find so that I know, for instance, that a particular song is on CD number 183 and not 185.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. I mean, let me ask also about. Yeah, sorry.
It's easy enough to keep track of records on a shelf if you have enough room, which is starting to be a problem for me. I've run out of room. But I can keep them in alphabetical order by artists, or if it's compilation LP, alphabetical order by the record company. But when CDs, when I have hundreds of CDs, each with a dozen different artists on it, that kind of taxes the memory a little bit. So thank goodness for computers.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah. I mean, also, have you made the effort to take the 78s that you've got, let alone the records, and make sure that they've been MP3ified or whatever the coding that is your preferred style?
Everything that's heard on the show, and I also decided to take the country collection, all the country from the 78 era, and put those on CD. I've done that because there's less of that music available on commercial CDs than is the case, for instance, with rock and roll or blues or old jazz music. There's been, a great many CD reissues of that sort of thing, so you can get all of Robert Johnson's recordings and...
well, there weren't that many of those, but yeah, he only had 2 CDs worth of recordings, I think, so he was easy.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
But not just for commercial or getting them out there, but I'm saying like saving the stuff that maybe nobody wants to buy. But I remember way back when on early in your years when I started listening, you once played a record that was devoted to the, 1904 and 1907 San Francisco earthquake.
That's right.
It was amazing to listen to. I mean, it wasn't recorded during the earthquake. They kind of made a audio drama out of it with music and everything.
That's exactly what it was. was, as much as would fit on 3 minutes.
Yeah. I mean, but that kind of stuff, just making sure that that's saved.
Right. It begins with an orchestra playing calmly, and then you hear the rumble of the earthquake, and you hear somebody saying, "Hey, it's an earthquake! Run for your lives!" And then you hear the bells clang and music that kind of sounds like something out of the Lone Ranger announcing the arrival of the fire engines. And then at the end, they play a dirge for those
right
perished in the quake. So it's the whole story in 3 minutes of music and narration and sound effects.
And that's kind of one of the things that I loved about, especially the early years of the show, is that when you didn't have so much pressure and whatever from the radio stations that you were syndicated to, you could play not just kooky, funny songs and also rock novelty songs, but if you felt like playing something that was really out there and not directly funny, but just strange or odd, you could do that too. I mean, I remember.
You can hear a little more. You can hear a little more of that sort of thing now on the show, because I'm on the internet, so I no longer feel pressure from radio station program directors. So I can be more free-ranging now, and I don't have to bleep the nasty words anymore.
Oh, do you do for? I thought maybe you do that for the regular show. You still keep that kind of clean, and then you do a bonus, or were you only doing that in the last years when you were still on syndicated regular radio, and then you tell people there was like an extra half hour that they could listen to with unexpurgated songs? Am I?
Well, that's the way it was when I was still on AM and FM. But now that we are internet only, I still do the bonus tracks. Almost every week I have bonus tracks, and that would be the things that are farthest out, and also perhaps things that people I want to make real sure that people don't expose their children to without knowing what they were doing.
Cool. And let me ask you about, and you don't have to be so, what shall I say, you don't have to give me numbers or anything like that, but I am curious, now that you've got this internet-only business model of subscribers paying $2 to hear a 2-hour show, or I think you can also do $4 for a very high-quality sound version of the broadcast. But is that, not to put a weird word on it, but is that making a living, or are you kind of retired and this is just that sort of supplements? How does that working out?
Well, we're making a living.
Really? That's wonderful. And how many subscribers, you don't have to do to the number, but I'm curious. How many subscribers?
I don't have the figures in front of me.
Oh, okay. No,
I don't pretend that we have as many listeners as we did during the height of the radio show's reach when we were on 200 stations. But the listeners we do have are extremely loyal. They have to pay, so
right.
They must be.
And one thing I'm kind of curious. I always thought maybe there would be an annual subscription rate rather than week after week after. Are you doing that yet?
Oh, yes.
Oh, you do? Okay. I haven't seen that on the site. It looks like you can do it every week, but it'd be nice if there was one annual, like every week you could tune in and hear the new one.
We also offer monthly and annual subscriptions.
Oh, that's wonderful.
We have all along.
And do you still have the Demento Society?
Yes.
Oh boy. Well, tell people what the Demento Society, please, is.
Yeah, the Demento Society is kind of semi-active right now. The person who was running it has been ill, and so we're not really up to date in orders. So we hope to get it back online soon. But the radio show, the Demento Online Club, as we call it, the DOC, that's going strong and putting out a new show. We just added a new show this morning, as a matter of fact, as we do every Saturday. And then we have almost 600 older shows available.
And now that the programming directors aren't telling you what to do, what are you kind of doing differently? And how much are you also still sort of catering to, I guess, the feedback that you get from your subscribers?
Well, of course we cater to that. We have a request a song option on the webpage, and every week I play a whole bunch of requests from different people, so we still cater to that a lot. And once a month we have the top 10, which is basically the most requested songs. So I still listen to my listeners, probably even more than I did before, because there's not quite the obligation to play things that would be appealing to the normal rock audience quite as much as I did before.
Yeah, no, I think that's wonderful. And also, I should mention, when people can subscribe and go to your site, they don't just have to listen to that week's show. You've got archives of hundreds of your shows available to listen to. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's almost 600, and they go way back to the very early years of the show. They're pretty much scattered through all the 40-plus years that I've been on the air. So you can probably find, you might even be able to find the very first show that you ever heard, or something kind of like it.
I'll betcha. I'll bet. I mean, I was saying, before you got on the air, I was telling folks that I just vaguely remember first time my folks were driving back from somewhere, and Laurel and Hardy came on the radio. And it was just such a bizarre thing to hear them. I guess I should just go through your archives and maybe find that show. I'm trying to remember what else was in that particular one. But by the next week, I was a fan. I was home on, I think it was Saturday night.
You.
Oh, yeah, well, of course, absolutely. You know, and sitting there, and I'll never forget, even then, when I was saying before about not just playing quote-unquote funny songs, there was an episode where you played a Bix Beiderbecke song with Bing Crosby singing called Ain't No Sweet Man That's Worth the Salt of My Tears. And that's become one of my favorite songs of all time. It's not funny per se, but it was just so great. And I was...
Oh, it is.
Yeah, sorry.
It is kind of fun to hear Bing Crosby singing a song that was obviously meant for a female singer.
Oh, that never occurred to me. Huh. Okay, thank you for seeing that. This is why I'm talking to musicologist Barrett Eugene Hansen, a.k.a. Dr. Demento, in the neighborhood. Let's roll it back then. Let's go back to childhood, where, if Wiki is correct, your dad was a pianist, and you were already...
He liked to play around the house. He was an architect by profession.
Oh, okay. And so, but he loved music, obviously. Did he have any...
Yes.
Love of crazy, goofy novelty songs, or that was just you?
Well, my dad, when I was 4 years old, brought home a copy of the record you played a few minutes ago, Cocktails for Two, which was new at the time.
Uh-huh.
And it was a big hit. It was a million seller, so he probably heard it on the radio somewhere and thought that would be fun to have, and especially fun to play for his, at that time, 4-year-old son. So he brought that home, and of course I was very fond of it, and the other side too, and played that a lot. And during the next few years, Dad bought probably another 8 or 9 Spike Jones 78s. So, and we would listen to Spike Jones on the radio. He had a weekly show on one of the big networks.
Yes.
And we listened to it.
And so that inculcated, and I think in one of your things you also mentioned your dad was kind of fond of Clancy Lowered the Boom. Was that a big, kind of a big song in your house?
We never had the record of it till later, but we heard it on the Jack Benny show. The Jack Benny show, that was like Seinfeld was in the 80s. It was just the show, the comedy show that everybody heard. Mm-hmm. And they had Dennis Day he played one of the members of the cast. It was kind of like a sitcom, but they also had music. Phil Harris was in the cast, too. So between those two, there would be 1 or 2 songs on every show. They were just kind of loosely woven into the plot line.
Right, and so
there was,
yeah.
So there was always music on that show, and around St. Patrick's Day, of course, they'd have Dennis Day sing Clancy Lowered the Boom or any of a dozen other Irish songs.
Now, then, again, getting back to the Wikipedia listing for you, there was this point when a record store opened up and they were kind of doing bargain bin 78s at 5 cents a piece. Did that...
Oh, yes.
Was that what sparked... Yeah, please.
Yeah, the Salvation Army store. I passed it on the trolley car. That dates me, too. Every day, my folks started sending me to a school that was across town, so I had to take the bus and the trolley car to get there. And it would pass the Salvation Army headquarters. And at first I thought, well, that's just where they take care of unfortunate old men. But then they put a sign in the window one day that said, records, half price, 2 for a nickel.
What? 2 for a nickel? Oh, my gosh, yeah.
So I got off the trolley car and went in, and they had piles and piles of 78s, 2 for a nickel. Most of them went back to the days before they had electric recording. Most of them went back to the teens and the early 20s when there was a big boom in record buying. And so there were all these foxtrots and vaudeville numbers mixed in with German and Scandinavian records. So it was quite a bonanza for me. I bought all that I could hold.
Right, yeah.
And needless to say, I was still a regular customer even after the sale was over and they went back to being a nickel apiece.
Well, you were hooked. You know, this is a drug addict.
Yes.
Cocaine is free the first time. Yeah, sorry.
Right. There was another store near my house, too, that sold records that had just been taken off the jukeboxes. Those were 19 cents, a little more money, but they were almost new records. As soon as something would drop off the charts, they'd take the records off the jukebox and put some new ones on, because the jukeboxes only held 20 or 30 records at that time.
Oh, wow.
Not hundreds like they did later. So we would get, like, the pop hits from a couple of months earlier. And so I kind of kept up that way. And not only that, but they also apparently had jukeboxes in black neighborhoods and also in neighborhoods where people like country music. So things that I wouldn't normally get exposed to much on the radio, especially the black music, I started to just by in bits and pieces to learn about that. One day I was in that store and there was this chess record.
Oh my gosh!
It showed a couple of chess pieces on it, and it was by this artist named Muddy Waters. I'd never heard of Muddy Waters, and I kind of wondered why they would have chess pieces on the label. Is this something about playing the game? But I spent 19 cents and brought the record home and heard my first Chicago Electric Blues.
Was it mind blowing, or did you not because sometimes I'll listen to a record. I remember the first time I heard the Captain Beefheart's Trout Mask replica in my early teens. I was like, oh no, this is noise, and put it away for 5 years, and then took it out again, and it's like, oh my God. Did you get Muddy Waters immediately?
I'm not saying I got him all immediately. I knew it was something exciting that was perhaps a little deeper than the rock and roll music, than Bill Haley or that sort of thing that was out at that time. So I certainly looked for more chess records and more Muddy Waters records, and gradually I found some of them, and also found records by Big Joe Turner doing Shake, Rattle, and Roll. That was another early favorite. And gradually you couldn't really read much about that sort of music at the time. It wasn't like today where you could Google Muddy Waters' name and find, 2 full-length biographies and
of course.
Heaven knows how much other information about an artist like that. In those days, there were just little scraps and shreds. There was a pulp magazine called Rhythm and Blues. I found that on the newsstand downtown Minneapolis. And it had lyrics of songs, generally not too accurately transcribed, but it had little articles about the artists. And though they were just kind of puff pieces, they still had a little bit of information, and they had pictures. So that's how I learned my first shreds of information about Jimmy Reed, Little Walter, B.B. King, etc.
Wow. Now, how did that morph from taking music seriously? I mean, are you conversant with an instrument? Do you play?
I used to play piano. I played piano all through high school. Never was very good at it, but I did play.
But didn't you get a degree in music?
Okay. I went to college, Reed College in Portland, Oregon. I'm still a loyal alum and go back there often. Anyway, I went there and graduated, and I was a music major, a classical music major. I had really no idea that I could ever make a living doing anything involved with the music that I really loved, because I couldn't sing or play very well. But classical music, I realized that you can make a living teaching about that.
Oh, okay, a theorist. I was wondering how that all worked out, because it said on the net that, because I do have the Google to check, that your dissertation or your thesis was on Alban Berg's Wojciech, which is kind of demented in itself. Sorry?
Yeah, and Debussy's Pelléas et Mélisande, too. I took those two operas and compared them. They're two very different sounding operas. Though they were written within a couple of decades of each other, they sound very, very different. Wojciech is in your face. It's concentrated, it's dissonant, and it's loud.
Right.
Helios is kind of ethereal, like much of Debussy's music. But I discovered that there is much in common between the two of them in the structure and how it differs, say, from an opera by Puccini or Verdi or somebody like that. And I came to the conclusion that they were both influenced to one extent or another by Wagner's works, and wrote that up in a thesis, and they said, okay, you can graduate. So that's how that turned out.
Was that a master?
Classical music,
Yeah.
too.
I'm sorry, I was just going to ask, was it a master's or a bachelor's?
Yeah, this was my bachelor's.
Oh, okay, cool.
This was undergraduate. Reed requires, unlike most colleges, Reed requires a thesis for graduation.
Cool. Well, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
For undergrad.
Then I went on to UCLA. By that time, I had come to realize that maybe I could make a living teaching about music that I really loved even more than classical music, because UCLA had set up a master's program in folk music studies.
Really? Back then?
Yeah, back then. This was the 60s when things like that were popular. They don't have that program anymore, Dave.
Oh, well.
But I was fortunate enough to get my master's in folk music studies, which would have prepared me nicely to, become a state folklorist for the state of Kansas or something like that.
Okay.
One of my fellow graduates wound up doing exactly that. And I don't know if she's still there with the budget cuts and everything, but she did that for many, many years. But anyway, instead, I got seduced by the rock and roll business.
Oh,
because
wow.
this was, after all, the 60s, and I was in Los Angeles. And if you've studied the history of rock and roll at all, you know that a whole lot was going on in Los Angeles in the 1960s.
And where were you working at that point? I mean, this was college, so by then you probably had to have what was your day job?
Well, I went through college.
Right.
I had a scholarship, so that
Cool.
provided me there. But shortly after I graduated, I got a job working with a record company called Specialty Records.
Oh, so cool. You stayed within the business. I mean, we forgot to mention that you were programming director at Reed College for their radio station for a period.
Of the campus radio station.
Yeah, cool. Well, hey, that's what I am here, so I know what it feels like. And then you went on, but you got a job in the biz. So Specialty Records was what kind? Sorry, yeah?
I left out one little. Sorry if the cell phone cuts in and out, but I'm cell phone only out here. But
no, you sound fine.
Bear with me. Anyway,
Sure.
So I forgot to mention that towards the end of my career at UCLA, I also spent some time as a roadie for a couple of bands.
Oh.
Did some brief tours of two bands that both made records and had some fame. One was called Canned Heat, and the other was called Spirit.
So as a roadie, what does a roadie do?
Hefted the instruments. At the Canned Heat played the old Fillmore in San Francisco. The old Fillmore, the very first one that Bill Graham had, was up on the second floor, and there was no elevator.
Oh, God.
That meant that all those heavy amplifiers had to be hefted upstairs, lugged upstairs by you-know-who. I was the roadie.
Oh, my God. You were the only one, or did you have like two or three?
I was the only one, and then I was overmatched for that job. Let me say. I also drove the VW bus that they had too, but I only did that for a few months, and then I was persuaded to go back to UCLA and finish my degree. So I did.
Oh, I didn't realize that was in the middle. Oh, God. So you literally that was a pretty brave move to stop college right in the middle.
Was.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
I was on half-time at UCLA.
That's cool that they allowed you to do that, first of all. But do you well, no, I guess you wouldn't regret those 6 months of, besides the backbreaking labor.
No, I don't regret it. It was experience, and I wanted to be part of rock and roll. To me, that was the most exciting thing that was happening. My friends who started out as folkies had become rock stars, and I wanted to be part of that. I wanted to produce records. I wanted to be like Phil Spector or Lou Adler, somebody like that, or Lieber and Stoller. I wanted to produce records.
Well, in a way, you have here and there, but that didn't really happen. Why do you think that you didn't become?
Well, that led me to Specialty Records, where part of my job was actually producing records.
Oh, okay. What kind?
R&B and rock and roll.
Uh-huh.
I produced or co-produced about a half a dozen R&B singles and one rock album. None of them had any commercial impact whatsoever.
Oh, okay. Well, it happens.
Actually, the most notable thing that I did as a record producer, and I'm wandering a little bit here,
Sure.
was strictly as a freelancer. I co-produced an album by John Fahey, the guitarist.
Okay.
And he was one of my fellow students at UCLA in the folk music studies program. So I got to know John pretty well. We were pretty good friends. And
All right.
so when it came time for him to make another album, he had already made 7 or 8 of them, but it was time for him to make an album for Vanguard, and he agreed that I could be the co-producer of the album, and I actually did most of the work, because the other guy listed as producer only came to one session. The rest of the time he was back in New York at the company's headquarters. But so an album called The Yellow Princess, which is still in print. You can still buy it on Amazon, I believe. And so you'll see my name as Barry Hansen as the producer.
Did you like producing? Did you feel comfortable behind the board and mixing and or not?
Well, I came to realize through that and through my work at Specialty that producing is only half musical knowledge and the other half of it is psychology. How to coax the perfect take or the best take out of your musicians. And I was kind of a novice at that. I don't know if I ever quite found my footing doing that part of it.
Okay.
But still, it was valuable experience. But before I could do more of it, I kind of fell into doing the radio show, and that was something where that seemed to be more perfectly suited for my talents.
Well, this is the perfect time to remind everybody that we're talking to the one and only Dr. Demento. It's Dave's gone.
Whoa, wind up your radio.
Oh, I love it. How many hundreds and hundreds of times have I heard that? Oh, it's so great to hear. It's just about 11 o'clock in the morning. You're listening to UNC Radio at uncradio.com on the internet. Also, if everybody or anybody is back from spring break yet, we're on your dorm room television sets at the college on Channel 3. If you want to also hear or know the songs that we've played so far on the show, some of the novelties that we've played, remember to go to the MySpace page for this program, myspace.com, and then search for Dave's Gone By. Well, we're talking, as I said, to Dr. Demento, and we are just up to the point when he has left his gig at Specialty Records. And how did you get that radio gig?
Okay, at first it was just me being a guest on somebody else's show. I had met this fellow named Stephen Siegel, also known as the obscene Stephen Clean. He was the friend. He had been an old college classmate of one of my best friends. So I met Stephen. He came to the house where I was living, which was actually the Spirit House with the band Spirit in Topanga, California. Mm-hmm. And he came and he saw my record collection, and I played a bunch of records for him, and he said, well, you got to bring some of these down and be a guest on my show. So I did that, and to make a long story a little shorter, it was popular. The people seemed to enjoy it, so I became a regular guest on the Obscene Stephen Clean's program. I was there every Thursday night, and that went on for several months. Mm-hmm. Until it was finally decided that the response was good enough that I should have my own air shift on Sunday night. And meantime, it had been Stephen that had given me the name Dr. Demento.
What was the song you were playing that he turned to you? Well, tell the story, yeah.
Well, when he started calling me that, the song that was playing was Transfusion by Nervous Norvis.
Right, yes.
And I remember one of the other station staffers, like a secretary or something, saying, you got to be demented to play that on the radio.
And it stuck.
And it stuck. Stephen later claimed that he had thought up the name before that moment, but anyhow, that's how I became aware that he was going to call me Dr. Demento, and it just stuck.
Did you mind, or you were just so happy to have the radio presence even before you got your show that, oh, they can call me whatever they want?
I think that's a fair assessment. After all, Steve was calling himself the obscene Stephen Clean, and nearly everybody else at that station had a cute name.
Ah, okay. So
There was this skinny guy from Boston that they called Mississippi Fats.
okay, that I got
I
it.
just thought it was funny.
Yeah, no, that's the kind of thing, Curly is a bald guy. I get it.
Right.
But what was the journey then from getting your own show on that radio station to syndication? How long did that take, and what was that process?
Let me mention one
sure.
other transition that happened before that.
Sure.
When I started being a guest on the Stephen Clean show, I was not playing just funny stuff. I was playing a mixture of funny stuff and all the other kinds of interesting, weird, bizarre music that I had come across in my years of record collecting. The kind of things that had impressed Stephen when he came to the house.
Uh-huh.
And, for instance, at that time, 1970, Sly and the Family Stone were extremely popular. But little did most people know that Sly Stone, Sylvester Stewart, had been making records for at least 8 years before he ever had a hit. And I had a bunch of those early records, and they're in various different styles, just kind of lightweight funk dance tunes. The very earliest ones, he and his brother had a singing act, and they tried to be the Coasters, doing these little novelty songs.
Huh.
And they didn't have any hits because the Coasters were better, but they were doing stuff in that style. So I had those records, and I played them as part of the Dr. Demento Hour, as it was called before I got my own show.
Uh-huh.
And things like that. And I take, the Rolling Stones in the 60s covered a great many blues and R&B songs, as did the Beatles. And I would play the original versions of those songs.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, sorry.
And something like the Stones, one of their early hits was called It's All Over Now.
Right.
Well, once you hear the original record of that by the Valentinos, you will wonder how you could ever think that the Stones version was any good.
Oh, I remember that happening when the Stones, many years later, did Harlem Shuffle, and it became a hit. And it was like, wait a minute, but when you hear Bob and Earl, it's like you cannot listen to the Stones version. There's just no comparison.
Right.
Absolutely.
So I knew that.
Yeah.
My stock in trade. But I discovered I'd open the phones up for requests, and I'd find that a disproportionate number of the requests were for funny songs. At that time, that meant the Purple People Eater and the Monster Mash, and They're Coming to Take Me Away, ha-ha, to the Funny Farm.
Yes.
And the more I played of that sort of thing, the more popular my little show got.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of realized gradually it wasn't just an epiphany, it was just something that happened over the course of a few months, that I should take that and run with it, that the show would be more popular concentrating on that than on the old R&B or anything like that, because whereas other people were playing roots rock, even then, a few, nobody else was really concentrating on the funny stuff. In fact, what had happened in popular music, through the 50s and the first half of the 60s, there were lots of novelty songs that made the charts. You turn on a top 40 station, and sooner or later you would hear a novelty record.
But then that stopped. They stopped doing that.
In the late 60s, that stopped. Music got more serious. It got more serious on many levels. You had the Beatles going from I Want to Hold Your Hand to Abbey Road.
Right.
You had Pink Floyd coming along. The Pink Floyd is wonderful, but they're very serious.
Yeah. Well, except when Syd Barrett went demented, and then they got less. Yeah. No, I'm kidding. But
a few of the things that Syd Barrett is featured on, like the song called "Bike," those are somewhat amusing. But by 1970, Pink Floyd was pretty darn serious.
Of course, yeah. And so you found the niche.
There's that number about grooving with a pick that has a cute title, and it's a nice, mostly instrumental piece, but it's not really a side splitter.
Right, of course. But you found this niche of playing those songs that radio had stopped playing.
Yeah.
And it became popular, yeah.
That was the basis, and then I started bringing in funny stuff from other eras, Spike Jones in particular. Alan Sherman and Tom Lehrer, Stan Freberg, people like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'd also play Frank Zappa. I didn't play too much Zappa at first because on KPPC they played Zappa all day long.
Oh, wow. The thought that radio stations used to do that kind of brings a tear to the old radio guy's eye here. But yeah, but I guess you also then played maybe other artists on his Bizarre or Discreet label to be even weirder. Yeah. Right, so the GTOs or something. Yeah.
The next big change, after I got my own show, and let me tell you about syndication. Fall of 1973, the rating books came out. Mm-hmm. By that time, I moved on to KMET, which had a bigger signal and was generally a more commercial operation. And they were starting to do pretty well as what was at that time a mainstream rock station. I mean, they played a lot of Stones and Beatles and a whole lot of Led Zeppelin and Hendrix and Eric Clapton and that sort of thing. Pink Floyd and also, I guess Aerosmith had come on the scene by that time. So, but anyway, I had my Sunday night, the Dr. Demento show. They expanded it to 4 hours because it was popular.
Yeah.
And then the fall of 1973, the rating books came out, and I had the #1 most listened to radio show on Sunday nights in Los Angeles.
Wow.
The AM stations and everybody. So after that, syndicators started coming around, and they'd call me and say, would you like to syndicate your show with our company? They thought that if it did that well in Los Angeles, it might at least get some ratings in Peoria. So.
Right. Well, maybe not Peoria, but yeah. And did you have a lawyer looking out for your interests, or you just signed on the dotted line and figured,
Eventually I did, yeah. By the time I got to that step, I did start having people looking out for me.
Cool. And so at the peak, quote-unquote, of terrestrial Demento-hood, how many affiliates, how many stations were you on, and how many states?
It peaked at around 200. I'm not sure that we had one in all 50 states, but it was close. I think at one time we had every state except South Carolina.
So, of all places, okay. Because I have to say, the one thing I was saying, again, in the early intro before you came on the air, was how incredibly disappointing it was for me. There was this time period when you were still very big on terrestrial radio, but we couldn't get you in New York. And it was before, like, all the radio stations went on the internet and you could hear elsewhere. It was a gap of a couple of years where, with all due respect to Colorado, where I live now, the most important state of the Union, did not have your show on any station. How did that happen?
Well, it's the Big Apple, and in any city, there were only like maybe 4 or 5 stations where my show would really fit the format, and it just happened that for a while all the stations in New York wanted to do something else with their Sunday evenings.
They have to be Sunday, because I remember I used to listen sometimes on early Saturday morning, early Sunday morning. I mean, it wasn't like a live show. You would be sending, like, literally discs to these radio stations, record albums.
Tapes and discs.
Yeah.
I remember there was one New York station had me, I think it was WPIX, did have me on Sunday morning, and when I went to New York and appeared live during that Sunday morning time slot once.
Oh, cool. Oh, wow. I wish I'd been there to see that. Wow. I'm sorry.
I can kind of roughly tell you when that was, because the same morning, right after I think I got off, they interviewed a couple members of the Police. Sting wasn't there, but the other 2 guys, Stuart Copeland and Andy Summers, came in and they talked to them. So whenever that first album by the Police with Roxanne on it was out, that's when it was.
Look, I will say that I have seen you once or twice, not that I'm stalking you, but I did get to see Dr. Demento live, because not only were you obviously on the radio every week, but sometimes you would come out, not only do personal appearances, but you did like a mini tour with these great novelty artists. And I saw you at the Bottom Line. I guess it was 90. Yeah, 90 or 91.
Line 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
And I toured either on my own or several times I toured with Weird Al Yankovic.
Right. Well, was he the headliner at that point, or was it still like the Dr. Demento show featuring Weird Al?
That's until Eat It hit.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I went out with him. Well, there were a bunch of mini tours, like 2 or 3 gigs, and then a couple of more extended tours with me as the headliner, and then Eat It by Weird Al.
Right.
So from that time on, Al got his name in bigger letters.
Oh, but you still went out together, and then you were kind of halvesy or almost the opener. But I want to know, like, when I saw you at the Bottom Line, I do remember there was Benny Bell, who was ancient at that point.
Oh, yeah, that was the 20th anniversary tour. That's the biggest tour I ever went on.
That was how many cities do you remember roughly? Where'd you go with it?
I think there were about 12. I think.
Now, if you're going with
only 3 cities got the whole live show with Benny Bell and all those people live. There was Sheb Woolley. Wasn't always the same people every stop, but Tiny Tim, he was on all the stops.
Mm-hmm.
Sheb Woolley, who did the Purple People Eater. Eddie Lawrence, the old philosopher, he was on a couple of the stops. Mm-hmm. And Benny and Weird Al.
Was it Bobby Boris Pickett also, or was he not part of that?
Yes, he was. You are absolutely right. Yes, he was.
But here's the deal. I'm sorry, yes.
So that whole lineup did 3 cities, New York, San Francisco, and L.A., but then I did 7 or 8 other towns with just me and Al.
Now, can I ask, though, especially with that I mean, you're touring here with Benny Bell and his wife, who was basically there to hold the piece of paper for him, to read the lyrics. I remember that. It was wonderful, but, okay, he's a very old man. You've got Tiny Tim, who's a lunatic. Were you all on a bus together? I mean, how did you coordinate all that?
No, it was just those 3 stops, so, no, we most of the travel was separate.
Oh, so they got to the place, yeah.
I did many tours with Al, or at least several tours, where they had a bus.
Wow. Well, that makes...
now they have 3 buses plus a semi, but in those days they had 1 bus plus a semi.
Well, sure. I mean, all he needed way back when was his accordion, and maybe some hair gel. That was it.
Way back when, by the late 80s, he had his band and his whole rock and roll stage show.
Do you miss... Do you still like doing personal, because you do them, personal appearances and shows and comic cons and things like that?
I enjoy that. I do more if I could make a little more money at it, because, it does take me away from the things that I do here at the house and from being around home. I do more if I could. I love doing these cons, but they generally don't have much money.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that.
Comic Con, of course, is mammoth, but most of the smaller cons, they're kind of basically non-profit. They're just for fun, so they expect people to generally pay their own way.
Oh,
but I'm actually booked for one in Reno. It's a world con called Renovation, I think they're calling it.
What on earth?
It's World Con, which is a worldwide science fiction fan convention. I'm booked for that in August.
Are you a science fiction fan, or are you just sort of lumped in with that because kind of the sci-fi, with all due respect, nerds would be the same kind of people who would enjoy goofy, novelty, Harry Potter mockery numbers, things like that?
That's a fair assessment. I like science fiction, but I don't have a lot of time to devote to it.
So let me ask, in the fact that you are still doing your show every week on the internet, which means you still have to have all, access to all the music that you've got, and you still have music coming in. Is it still, must be a full-time job?
Pretty much. Yeah, listening to all the stuff that comes in. It actually takes longer now sometimes to download a bunch of stuff than it would to just open up a package with a CD and play it. But it's still nice to have, I can hear things like an hour after they're mixed and created. The song can arrive to me as soon as the Charlie Sheen mess broke. I got tons of songs about Charlie Sheen, so I was able to react to that faster than I used to be able to.
And people can email them to you. I mean, literally, they can do it an hour later. It's in your email box. Do you have help?
Oh,
sorry.
I used to have a 3.5-month lead time, no, a 3.5-week lead time, I'm sorry, between the time that I'd record a show and the time that people would hear it. That's because it had to be pressed up on LPs and mailed to the stations. So now things go much faster.
Oh, sure. I mean, I remember, I wanted to ask you how you dealt with this, because I wouldn't say that I'm a tragedy junkie, but I'm kind of sometimes fascinated by how live broadcasters deal with something that's unprecedented or bizarre. So I will go back and thanks to the internet, be able to listen to, like, radio stations or TV stations that were on the air way back on September 11th, 2001. And again, that kind of thing of how you, considering the kind of show that you do, cope with it. I mean, I remember you came back and you played Desperado, not by the Langley School, but by that middle school or something like that. That was one of your main things. But how did you cope with, now that it's almost a 10-year anniversary, of dealing with an event like that?
I haven't thought about what I'm going to do in September. I didn't do that much really at the time because there wasn't much I could do. I found this Johnny Cash song called Sold Out of Flagpoles, and I thought, well, that kind of fits in with the mood of the country, so I played that a couple of times. Outside of that, though, I mean, the week after September 11th, people heard a show that had been recorded 2 weeks before September 11th, so people, I guess, if they just needed a laugh, they got it from my show. Otherwise, they didn't. There wasn't too much I could do. And I didn't get nearly as many songs about 9/11, and the ones I did get were all about taking revenge on those nasty Arabs.
Well, yeah.
Some of them were pretty racist.
Well, back then, it's kind of understandable, but and then the ones going after Osama specifically, where those started to come out real quick. But it was that kind of, do you remember sitting down to do your first show, even though you had that 3-week backlog? At some point, you had to sit down and do the next show. And was it a weird experience?
It was a weird experience. I think it wound up being pretty much a normal show, except for maybe that song Sold Out of Flagpoles and one or two others. I have to go back and look at the playlist. But it was weird, but I think I decided that I should pretty much do a standard show for anybody who wanted to hear it.
Cool. Now, speaking of weird... Oh, sorry. Yes.
In Alan Sherman's book, A Gift of Laughter, I was just reading that because I wrote notes for a bunch of Alan Sherman reissues last year. And I was reading his book where he talked about doing a show the night that Kennedy was assassinated.
Oh my, yeah. What did he say about it?
Well, he said he decided to, he was booked to do a show at the Copacabana in New York City, one of the most prestigious nightclubs in the world at that time. And he was booked. So he said he was going to do the show that he was doing the night that JFK heard him in person, which he did once.
Oh, wow.
And so he said, I don't expect you to laugh after any of the songs, but I'm going to do the show and hope you enjoy it. And that's what he did.
Huh. And also, I remember, speaking before of Weird Al Yankovic, whom you, of course, really discovered that horrible news several years back now, when he lost his parents one night because of carbon.
And then he went ahead and did a show. He was, I think, in Appleton, Wisconsin, and he went ahead and did it. He said, I'd rather do that than just sit and cry. And he continued his tour. He had like 3 more stops in that leg of the tour, and he did every one. Then he went back home for the funeral, and then he went back out on tour again. That's just the way he reacted.
Did you talk to him around that time? Did you have a conversation with him, condolences, and say, how are you managing this?
I didn't go into detail.
Sure.
I had heard in the news that he was going ahead with his show. I sent him an email of sympathy. I think that was probably it at the time.
Right.
I didn't feel the need to bombard him.
No, of course. But you guys have stayed in touch, even more recently, and still friends and still colleagues and stuff like that, I assume.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, he's in Australia right now, I believe.
Oh, wow. Now, speaking of... sorry.
Yeah, I'm just saying I got an email from Australia about a week ago. I think he's still there, but he's got about 6 or 7 dates over there.
Cool.
And then he'll come back and finish up his album, and then he has a tour set for this summer. He's going to do state fairs and county fairs again.
Wow. Do you feel almost like a proud papa when it concerns to Weird Al?
Well, at least in terms of showbiz, yes.
I mean, what was it about him? Because you have so many people sending you music, and a lot of really talented, funny people. Why did he click in a way that really no one had since Alan Sherman doing that kind of work?
Oh, it's a long story. Let me go into it. I guess, first of all, it's a combination of inspiration and perspiration.
Mm-hmm.
Not only does he have a lot of natural talent, but he works very hard at it. Al is very detail-oriented. He doesn't just dash off those parodies that he writes. He'll spend weeks on each one, just making sure that one of his secrets is that most of his songs, every verse is funnier than the one before. The first verse gets you hooked, and then each verse builds on that.
Mm.
A lot of people who do parodies don't really have that knack. They'll think of 3 or 4 great lines and have a nice idea for fitting a plot line to an existing song, but it kind of runs out of gas by the 3rd verse.
Right, whereas Al builds and builds, yeah.
Right, and he's very detail-oriented. That gets down to the videos that he does, the stage performances that he does. He has not 1 but 2 valets to help him change into all those costumes.
Okay, yeah. Actually, so do I. I have them here at the station. I need to change right after this this interview. So they're just out in the parking lot, and they'll get me into my my aluminum suit that I wear during the second half of the program. But I'm sorry. I shouldn't try to do humor in front of Dr. Demento. I should not even attempt it. But yeah, but that part of the thing. The one other thing I wanted to ask about Weird Al is, does he ever feel frustrated, or maybe did you, that he never gets quite enough credit for his original songs? Because some of my favorite songs are his music and lyrics are his own, like Mr. Frump and the Iron Lung and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think he would love to see one of his originals become a hit single, which has never happened. The closest he got was 1 More Minute. But
right, yeah.
He would love to see one of his originals become one of his biggest hits, but he'll take what he's got, I think.
Well, yeah, he's had a pretty extraordinary career, and really thanks to you. And if you don't mind, I'd like to ask about the fact that you have had in your studio and met some really astonishing people. I mean, we talked about Frank Zappa and how you didn't even have to play him on one of the radio stations you were on because they were playing him anyway. But he became really important on some level to your show in those 70s, early 80s years. And you've met him a few times. He was on your TV show. He was on your radio show. What are your thoughts about Frank Zappa?
Well, a musical genius, certainly. And someone he was not terribly easy to interview because, especially in later years, he got quite suspicious of people around him. He was kind of paranoid that people would cheat him in business.
And I'm sorry, I just find that ironic because I imagine that both Wildman Fisher and Captain Beefheart had the same thoughts about Frank.
I imagine so. You're right there, Dave. But anyway, so he was suspicious and guarded by nature, and got more so as time passed. The first couple of interviews I did with him were the most fun. But even the last one, which was also the longest one that I did, has some wonderful moments in it. But he was just being more guarded in general. He was a workaholic. He and Weird Al both were really workaholics. Neither of them, especially Frank. You could not imagine Frank like going to a baseball game and kicking back with the guys or anything like that. That was not in his nature. He spent time with his family, but other than that, and he spent time with groupies backstage and with the and stuff like that. I mean, that's been documented. But outside of that, he was just not happy unless he was working.
Actually, I didn't know the groupie thing was all that well documented because he was so anti drug and anti not obviously not anti booze, but
He was not on anti-sex, we'll put it that way.
And Gail was cool with it, or, it just came with the territory?
I don't think she was especially cool with it, but she, I guess, had to accept that was part of being married to him.
Okay, well, yeah. Should have gone into rock and roll. What can I tell you? Anywho, wait, my wife is listening. I'll reverse that. Anyway, what about, I'm sorry?
I'm just saying, I won't be much help because I'm spacing out on the gal's name, but there was one of those people who had an affair with him that wrote a book about it.
Oh, my God. Well, it wasn't Susie Cream Cheese. Was it,
No.
Oh, I don't know. Not
No,
DeBarge or
I'm
something.
in my library this moment, Dave. I'm in my studio, surrounded not by books, but by records.
By records, of course. Well, what about you also? I seem to remember Captain Beefheart was on your show at some point. Mm-hmm. Wasn't he? What was...
Yeah, he was on. He was on twice.
And was he... How was he? Was he normal, or was he interesting, unusual?
He always had unusual turns of phrase. You can hear both of those interviews. I know one's up already, and I think the other one was just posted last week or this week. So anyway, you can hear both of those interviews on DrDemento.com. He always had a nice turn of phrase to come up with.
Do you remember any of them that specifically were on your...
No, you'll have to listen to DrDemento.com.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
Because it has to be, you have to hear them in context.
That's fair. And some of the other major... Sorry.
Guy, both Frank and Beefheart were people that I met before I was Dr. Demento.
Huh. Because you were in the music biz or just around seeing them perform?
Right. Yeah. In the case of Frank, I just happened to, one of my fellow students at UCLA had got to know him and said, you ought to meet Frank Zappa. And I said, well, sure. So she took me to his house, and we had a nice talk. And
wow.
I think he was quite impressed because the two musical loves of his life were avant-garde classical music,
right,
like Barretts or Stravinsky, people like that, and doo-wop from the 50s, rhythm and blues.
And you were an expert on both yourself.
I knew about both of them, and he knew people who were experts on the avant-garde, and he knew quite a few people who were experts on the doo-wop, but he had met very few who knew anything about both of them. So,
that's cool.
So that was,
yeah.
So that impressed Frank about me. So he was very eager to be a guest on my show in the early years. And
among the other people, there's a pretty famous one that you had on, Screamin' Jay Hawkins, who was in regalia. Oh, yeah. He didn't just come in and he was in full Screamin' Jay mode. Am I correct in that?
Yes. Oh, yes. He had this walking cane which had a little skull attached to the top of it.
Uh-huh.
That's the most colorful part of what he had on.
Oh, okay. I thought he'd come in his usual coffin thing, and he can go through all of it. No.
He did not bring the coffin into the radio studio. But, I doubt if it would have fit through the door. But anyway, he came certainly dressed to kill.
Did you ever have Wildman Fisher on live? Well, you recorded with him. You sang "I'm a Christmas Tree" together, but
right.
Was he ever a guest?
No, he was not on the radio show. He was not somebody that you could probably trust to show up at a particular time.
Well, right.
You had to be you had to be looser about scheduling him than we did, and you'd never know what he'd say. And so I saw him on a number of occasions, but no, he was never really a guest on the radio show per se.
Did you see when you got to see him and briefly work with him, I guess, through Barnes and Barnes? Did you? How was he?
Well, he's very changeable. He could be as nice as could be, and he could be totally off the wall, and you'd be kind of, because he's a big man, you'd be in some fear for your physical well-being if he got in one of his moods and started stomping and glowering around.
Right.
But other times he could be as sweet and as wonderful as you could ever ask. Yes?
And you saw both of those sides of him, even in the brief times that you got to see him.
Well, I got limited exposure to both sides.
Yeah.
I was spared the real scary moments that Barnes and Barnes would tell me about.
And, I mean, I had as also phone guests on the program a couple of years back, the two guys who made the Derailroaded documentary about him, which I assume, well, you were in that documentary, as a matter of fact. Have you? I haven't heard, though, anything about him in a couple of years. What's the latest you've heard on how Larry Fisher's doing?
As far as I know, he's doing okay in the home. He emerged to make a guest appearance a couple of years ago, sang a few songs on stage. I did not see it. I didn't know about it at the time, but so he does get out once in a while. Really?
Because I was shocked. I remember he was on Jimmy Kimmel, and this is going back almost 10 years now. When he came out, they didn't even know who he was. He just came out for their talent showcase. And it was just a shock that I turned the dial, and there, my God, that really is Wildman Fisher. But that was before Derailroaded. That was already going to like the early 2000s. So I didn't realize he's been sort of still doing some stuff here and there since then. I'm glad, because the documentary doesn't paint a hopeful picture of him really ever leaving the home at this point for anything. So I'm glad he is.
As far as I'm concerned, I just want him to be happy and live a pleasant life.
Well, yeah, of course, absolutely. Sorry.
I'm not absolutely dying to see him perform again. I just hope he's happy.
That's nice. That's cool. And speaking of performers or people who really aren't performing anymore, I do want to say that among the people who wish you well, Rusty Warren is going to be on the show next week here on Dave's Gone By.
Cool.
So I got an email from her saying, remembering her to you to say hi and thank you for what you did for her, and just so many friends who. What else? Let's see. I'll read this to you. This is one of the letters we got to the station from Mike in L.A. It says, Dr. Demento! Exclamation point. Dr. Demento! Dr. Demento! I wept when I heard that this show was ending last year. I mean, I guess he didn't realize at that point that you were on the net. It's only a slight exaggeration to say that he saved my life. When I was a dorky, friendless new kid in a strange school in Denver in 1979, his broadcasts on Q103 FM, which was a light rock station during the week, were like a beacon that said there are others of your kind out here. And Mike says, someday I will finish my novel that uses that as a theme. As I go around the world, I'm always amazed to find the people I get along with best were always glued to their radios on Sunday nights as well, learning stuff they would carry with them for decades. So,
that's very touching. Thank you, Mike. I'm glad I was able to help, and thank you, Dave, for reading that for me.
Oh, you're very welcome. I mean, as I said, it's just this absolute thrill, and I don't want to keep you too long, but I mean, now that I've got you, I don't want to let you go. I just love the what do you think your great legacy and impact has been or will be looking 20, 50 years from now?
Well, helping out people like Mike who are in the situations like that, that's certainly one of my great legacies, bringing some happiness and some amusement into a lot of people's lives. That's something I'm very proud of, and also exposing people to a lot of new talents, whether it's Al or Frank Zappa. I've gotten more thanks from people who said that I was the first one to expose them to Zappa, more about him than any other artist. But I have exposed a lot of people to music they otherwise wouldn't have heard.
Let me. Sorry. Yes.
That's something I was proud of even long before I was Dr. Demento. The first disc jockeying I ever did actually was playing music for sock hops at my high school. I was growing up in Minneapolis. Our high school had exactly one black student. But I had heard by that time, talking about Muddy Waters and people like that and Bo Diddley, I was quite an R&B fan, and so I took it as my mission to expose the people who danced at the sock hops to R&B music. And of course I'd play the hits of the day, whether it was Elvis or the Everly Brothers or whatnot, but I'd always mix in some R&B. They never really liked to dance to Muddy Waters, but Bo Diddley was a different story. They loved Bo Diddley to dance to.
Did you get any racist flack from students or teachers, or were they just really happy to have this new kind of rhythmic music?
No racist flack. It was Minneapolis, and it was a school that kind of catered to the academic elite, so racism was definitely out of style.
Oh, well, good.
None of that at all. However, some of the teachers wondered about the music, but they were generally pretty liberal. There was one parent, this has nothing to do with Bo Diddley, there was one parent who decided that Party Doll by Buddy Knox was a dirty record. And so she was able to convince the school authorities to tell me never play Party Doll by Buddy Knox. They didn't mind Bo Diddley, but for some reason that record had gotten under that woman's skin. I could play Party Doll by Steve Lawrence, but not the Buddy Knox.
Oh, that's bizarre. Was it the same song, two different songs, or Steve Lawrence was the same song?
Steve Lawrence covered the same song, and it was lame. I played that once.
That makes no sense whatsoever. I mean, I can understand maybe she thought that the Party Doll was like this blow-up doll thing with a suckable mouth or whatever, but if it's the same... weird. I just don't... It's like this week with Gilbert Gottfried getting fired, as the Aflac Duck for his Japan com. I mean, I assume you have your thoughts on political correctness and all that.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's really through much of my radio career, you could get in more trouble and get fired more quickly for doing something that had racial or ethnic implications than you could for saying the F word. So, and I tended to feel that was illogical, but I went along with it. I mean, I do have in my collection many records from like 1910 where the N-word is freely used, which is considered to be part of everyday conversation at that time. But
nipples?
That's not quite right.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, that one.
Yeah.
But anyway, so after the show got to be popular, I quickly became aware that I had to give that stuff a very wide berth. In fact, put all that stuff away on the shelf because there were more people that got fired over racial implications in what they said than were ever fired, I think, for saying the F word.
Which is probably right in its way.
I would agree with you there.
Right. Let me ask, the other question that I kind of wanted to know is, at the point when terrestrial radio was becoming really impossible and programming directors were nuts and you were losing stuff, you did try satellite. Why did satellite not work out? They
didn't want to pay me.
Oh.
I was paid for them to use old Dr. Demento shows. I edited the shows, mostly for timing, not for content so much, but for timing, so that they fit exactly the time slot that they wanted.
Okay.
And I did that. It took a few hours every week to do that, and they paid me just peanuts for it. And finally, the contract came up for renewal, and we thought that we'd ask them for something a little closer to a living wage, and they said, no, we'll do our old comedy. That was that. Is it me, or has satellite not really fulfilled the promise of what seemed to be there about 14, 15 years ago when they first started putting those Sirius and XM things up in the air? Is it me? I mean, what went wrong with it? Oh, I don't know. They just decided they could make more money doing it in a more conventional way, I guess. I mean, it's still nice to have the all reggae station. I have XM in my car.
Oh, yeah.
And the all blues station, things like that.
And can I ask what's, when you're not thinking in terms of your next Demento show or the one after that and looking for topic themes and stuff, what do you listen to just to clear your head and just for pleasure?
Oh, old records of all kinds.
Just
and new stuff sometimes.
But is there a way to turn off your brain for your work brain, your Demento, as it were, brain, to say, okay, I'm not listening to this to find the song. I just want to hear this.
Okay, you want to know it's a contemporary group. I put on their music, and it totally takes me out of Demento mode, even though they have one funny song that they do. And I listen to them fairly often late at night. It's Owl City.
Owl City, okay.
Are you familiar with them?
No, but I'm going to try and get, what kind of music are they? Contemporary what?
It's electronic music,
Ooh.
but it has vocals. Adam Young. It's basically one guy named Adam Young, and he does love songs.
Oh.
It appeals to 15-year-old girls.
Okay. I remember when
Yeah,
I
he
used to. No, sorry.
He actually comes out of a Christian rock background, but he doesn't sing about Jesus in his songs.
Okay. Huh.
But he does basically love songs and songs that are just kind of abstract. A song called Umbrella Beach, and they just have real nice electronics. It's just very pleasant and relaxing to listen to. There's nothing aggressive about it. It tends to be rather calm.
Cool. And do you appreciate, I guess radio people would, or music people would, appreciate silence a lot? Do you go somewhere where there's no music and no noise?
Yeah, I do.
Is that important to you, or is it just, nah, everybody's used to noise everywhere anyway?
Oh, yeah, it's important. Everybody's used to noise anywhere, so it's nice not to have too much noise.
Cool. And one other question. I mean, I didn't know when to throw this in during the whole thing, but I am curious. And I guess it's just a joke because they had to use your voice. But how did you become the arch enemy of Bart Simpson?
It's just the plot that they wrote for that show. Matt Groening told me when I was hired to do that show that my show had inspired him back in his early days when he was first starting to do cartoons.
Okay.
Long before The Simpsons. He grew up in Portland, Oregon, and there was a station that carried my show there, and he said he listened to it a lot when he was trying to get ideas for his cartoons. So he said that having me on The Simpsons was payback, but I think he left it up to his writers to decide exactly how I should be used. He just set the word, let's use Dr. Demento in an episode. And so I was called to come in and record.
Mm-hmm.
And so all the voice talent was there. And so they all sat around in a circle, which is, I guess, the same way that they used to do radio dramas in the 1930s. They all sat around in a circle, each with their own microphone.
Uh-huh.
And they went through this script, one line at a time.
Oh, wow.
And, of course, when they do any animated show, the first thing they do is the voices.
Right. And then they match... Right. So they matched
the animation is done to fit the previously recorded voices. So they had me in, and my part is at the very beginning of the show. So I did my part first, and they did each line 4 or 5 times till they were sure it was right. And they had it together later, and I got to sit around and watch them do the entire rest of the episode that way.
Oh, that must have been pretty cool, actually. That must have been kind of wonderful.
Yes, it was.
But,
real nice experience on the 20th Century Fox lot in West L.A.
But there was never an explanation as to why Dr. Demento would have been Bart's arch nemesis. It was just kind of absurd, in other words.
Your guess is as good as mine, Dave. That's just the plot line they came up with.
And you didn't mind. It was fine by you. It was just so strange, but another classic strange moment. And I guess the last question for the wonderful Dr. Demento, who I have to thank so much for being in the neighborhood today, is the unfortunate sort of obvious one. You're in your 60s, right, at this point?
Yes.
You're still, thank God, doing your show, hopefully healthy. Is there a point when it will be time not to do anymore? Or is the stuff that you can do right up until, like, your 90s or so?
Well, we'll see how my health holds up. I feel fine now.
Good.
Of course. And I'll have to try and avoid, of course, earthquakes and things like that. You never know about that.
Right. Well, for your record collection, if not just for you, my gosh.
Right.
I mean, you know. Oh, let me ask you about that collection. Is it, at the point when, we all have to go sometime, is it going to be willed to your family or the Smithsonian, or what are your plans?
Well, let's something we're looking into right now.
Okay.
That's all I can say, and it's the truth. No, there are no definite plans.
Oh, okay. I was just curious because it's something to think about to make sure that it's preserved. It's probably worth obviously millions of dollars, and it'd be important for your family, but also important for the world to have access.
We shall see.
Cool.
I don't think anybody in my family really wants to have hundreds of thousands of records to look after.
Oh, yeah. Well, you've been married. What, for 30 years or so? No, or how long?
I've been married now for 27 years.
20. Congratulations. Is Sue, the wonderful Sue Hansen, does she still have her own job, or is she basically part of Thelonian or Dr. Demento Productions?
Oh, the latter. That's true.
Cool. And you have kids, do you?
No kids.
No kids. Was that none of my business, but a conscious decision to give your life to music instead, or?
I somehow never felt it was my mission in life to be a breeder. Maybe I just wanted to preserve my youth for a long time. I didn't want to take on the responsibilities, and I still don't. And happened to fall in love with somebody else who felt the same way, so there you go.
Wow. Well, you have reawakened the child in so many people. I guess that takes the place of ever having to have kids, because you've turned, 50-year-olds, 70-year-olds back into kids again, 2 hours every week for 3-4 decades, and I think that's wonderful.
Well, thank you for saying that, Dave, and thank you for what you do.
Oh, well, you're most welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, we have been talking under the smogberry trees to Dr. Demento, and I just thank you so much. Everybody, by the way, please go to drdemento.com. You can hear his brand new shows every week. They're just $2 a piece or $4 for, what is it, like extra special audio? What is that? High quality? Stereo. Oh, $4 for stereo. But you can also get, as he said, shows from all the way back to like the early years, the 1970s, the 80s. You get the whole history of Dr. Demento at drdemento.com. Doctor, you have healed me today. Anything that was wrong, being the doctor that you are, you have healed me by being in the neighborhood, and I'm so thrilled, and just wish you health and more music and more dementia. Would you mind closing our little interview with the thing that you close your show with every week?
Don't forget to stay, Dee.